Welcome to Economics Happy Hour. My name is Matt,
And my name is Jadrian.
and we are thrilled to have you with us. This is, I believe, the first non-debate, non-jet set. Maybe we had one in between there. Since
We talked about why we became econ majors.
that is true, we did. I loved that episode. That was a lot of
I
fun.
did too.
Um, but it's nice to be here at night. It's about a week after the debate. It's nice to be not talking a debate thing, I have to
Yes.
say. But anything new and exciting in your world?
Mm. Mm. Um, no, it's same stuff.
Yeah.
It's class related stuff. I'm behind on every project that I've said yes to. I've said I continue to say yes to more things. So same old, same old.
Yeah. Uh, for me, I can't remember if we talked about this on the podcast at all. I was asked, the dean of the School of the Arts and School of Humanities had to go on leave, and unfortunately, I don't even know the case. I really hope she's doing okay. But I was asked to step in as interim dean of School of the Arts, which is not common for a business school dean. But it's been there. My semester's been incredibly busy, but it's been actually kind of cool. The people there are
Mhm.
wonderful. I've known a lot of them for a while. And so there's three departments. I've known the department chairs all for a decade, which I think helps. And I know and like and respect them. And I hope they think the same of me. And, it's trying to keep the trains moving. And
Yeah.
then I'm
Yeah.
also hopeful that at the end of this few months, I'll be able to hand off and I'm going to give some advice. Okay. Here's some things I saw and that maybe you could think about. So it's been an interesting first month of our semester though.
You listen, I said one of the weirdest things about coming from Penn State to Virginia Tech, and I didn't really appreciate the move from Washington State to Penn State, was just how different colleges are. I was very naive, I think, as an undergrad. I had a great university. I had a great grad program, and there's some great things about Penn State, and there's things I like about Virginia Tech. But just realizing like how different a college is that, I think when I was going through grad school, I was always just like, oh, there's department chairs of different departments, and there's deans, and y'all meet and do things. It's only now that I've been in enough places where I'm like, yeah, there are very different things across all of these. And even at a university that like the kind of core culture of a college can be different across campus. And
Yeah.
I don't think I really ever fully appreciated that until I got into an administrative position, and getting to interact with other people is both interesting and it's
Enlightening.
interesting.
Yeah, it's
Enlightening.
interesting.
Yeah, I think we have a great job. I
Yep.
think you and I have talked about this all the time. I think we have the best job in the world. There's I cannot imagine a job that I'd rather have than the job I have. And in my mind, you meet people who don't feel the same, like
Yeah.
who
Yeah.
I don't get the same feeling, and I'm just like, why are you doing this job? You don't seem happy. I think that's the part that has been surprising. Like I'm
Yeah.
so happy
Yeah.
when I go to work all the time.
Thankfully, I think people at Susquehanna are happy. And
Yeah.
as a general rule, so I'm going to give a shout out to the School of the Arts colleagues. The listenership might be zero from them, to be perfectly honest. But like I think as a general rule, if you get a degree in music, arts, graphic design,
Yeah.
or theater, you don't want a business school dean to be your dean, right? Like that's a general rule. But they know it's in a pinch, and like it happened after the semester started. They've been awesome. Like
Yeah.
they've embraced me, and they've been, they know I'm in here trying to help out, and so it's
Have you
been
have you
kind of cool. Yeah.
have you signed up on the purchase of new musical equipment? Is
Um, there has
have you
been a massive piece of musical equipment that broke down, and I signed off on a very major expense to get it
and
fixed.
that's just pure trust, right? Like that's you don't know if that's a good deal. You're just like, yes, I trust
I
you.
trust. Yeah, I know. I've known the department chair. I've golfed with that department chair. He's just a great guy,
Okay.
and I
Yeah.
know that. I'm sure he did his due diligence on it. And if he said the cost of a harpsichord repair is this much, I'm gonna believe him.
Yes.
And yeah, yeah. So it's good
That's
stuff.
cool though. It's cool to get to think about like how different that is. I think,
Yeah,
moving to Virginia Tech, I get to see all the stuff that goes on in a physics department, biology,
yeah,
chemistry, and I've never had any sort of experience with that. And I'll go to these meetings, and right, their concerns are very different than our concerns. Their
yep,
concerns
yep.
are like lab space, right? Like they need more space to do their experiments, to have their teams and stuff. And I'm just sitting here going, Yeah, no, we don't have that problem. Like
Yeah.
I could really use a new computer. Like that's all I need to do my job. But it's cool to hear just sort of the different needs of,
No,
you need a new heart.
it's fascinating, and I've been busy, but I've also been reminding myself that it's been busy, but it's not been like disaster busy. It's just
Yeah.
busy with a lot to do, and I'm trying to. I generally try to be optimistic, and I'm been excited about that. So, speaking of happiness, what are you drinking tonight?
You must have just saw me pour this. I'm gonna give a shout out to my friend Tim. Tim is coming through tonight. It is late while Matt and I are recording this, and so I
Yep.
wanted something a little easier on us. So I will be alternating between beer and water so I can get ready for bed. But I'm having the Hoosier Game Day Lager, a classically smooth and refreshing beer out of the great state of Indiana by, if I can find the brewery, a brewery in Upland Brewing Company.
Upland Brewing Company. That's Tim Dye, for guest on the podcast. If you didn't check that out, see that. I went a little bit different tonight. I actually made
Ooh,
a, a
Moscow Mule.
it is a Moscow Mule, but we call it a caramel mule. Caramel
Oh,
vodka, and then we throw a caramel inside, an actual little candy inside, and it's pretty tasty. And also, I wanted it something a little bit lighter, so I did, not quite as much vodka as normal. So
I probably should have done that. While I was reading this, while you were talking about that, this is also the official craft beer sponsor of Indiana University Athletics. So I even got the little
there we go.
stripes on there. That's a cool
Craft
beer.
beer. Curious if anybody would sponsor Susquehanna Athletics, and two, whether Susquehanna University would accept a sponsor
Mm.
as a Division III school, or if we're like, oh, we can't have a beer sponsor. So I'm not sure.
Rusty Rails right up the road. You could
Rusty
make it
Rail. We've got Axeman Brewery has a location in
they have a Penn
Grove.
State beer. They've
Yep,
got
yep.
like a Nittany Lager or something like that.
And
Ours
Marzoni's is a little chain in Pennsylvania.
the Virginia Tech one is, and yeah, you actually had the Virginia Tech one when you came down.
Yep,
The
it's a good
the
beer.
Fightin' Hokie Lager. Yeah, so I'll share this with the listeners. This is one of my favorite things. I did an interview today about Jet Set Conference with our university, and one of the the woman interviewing me asked, did they have a good time? Did they enjoy it? I'm just sitting there going, yeah, they drank the stadium out of a beer.
Did they? Did everybody?
Yes.
Did we,
So
I should say?
yes, I was selling the Fightin' Hokie Lager so hard that y'all drank 2 full cases with your single tickets. Everybody was drinking the Fightin' Hokie Lager and going back for like seconds.
2 full cases is only 48 beers out of what, 90 people?
Yeah, but there was only like 50 people. Like you had other beer
then-
choices
okay.
and wine choices.
That's a good point.
Yeah,
You did a good job
so yeah,
selling the Fighting Hokie Lager.
it's a really good beer. So I think our partner is out of Richmond. I think is where they're at.
Oh, very cool.
Make
Very
that the move, Matt. I think you
Get
could maybe
a sponsor.
Rusty Road. They could sponsor the College of Business. You could do a little brewery entrepreneurship or something.
I like the way you're thinking. So, well,
Cheers,
cheers
Matt.
before we begin. And I think we have an interesting topic to discuss. There have been a couple articles, one in the Financial Times, one in the Atlantic, and both based off of a new working paper. And I'm going to phrase the question a little bit differently than they did in these articles. But the question, I guess, that we'll address is do the elite economics departments influence things in the profession too much? And the basis of this, there's an article in the Atlantic called Break Up Big Econ. In the Financial Times, the titles is Economics in Need of Trust Busting. And they're both of them kind of based a little bit on a working paper that came out that shows the concentration of Nobel Prize laureates within economics is much greater than what you see in most other Nobel Prizes. This is Nobel Prize laureates in economics, really focused on basically they're at 8 schools, and 8 schools only. And that's not what the case is in most of the other Nobel Prize disciplines. And so economists talk about concentration and monopoly can bring out inefficiencies. And that's we texted a little bit back and forth about this. I shared a Twitter post and you mentioned a different article, and we thought this might be a fascinating topic. So
yeah. It's so Matt, let me tell you right off the top, I think this may actually go exactly with what I was saying earlier. I don't think I realized how much power is in economics is at those top universities. Until I really got into universities, right? Like
Yeah.
I didn't think about. I just assumed people sort of always moved around, and the best people go to the best places. And I think we have those stories. I think in econ, so I always think John
Yep.
List is like a perfect example. Gets his PhD at Wyoming, which is a great school. Goes to work. His first job's at University of Central Florida. Then makes his way to Chicago. Right, this sort of idea
Right.
that
Yeah.
the best
Maryland in
people move around.
between. Maryland
Mar-
ag econ in between.
Yeah, that people move around, and I never really realized until I started like hanging out with Bill Goff, actually, of just talking about like physics education, for example, like where did the best physicists work,
Yeah.
and that there's a Nobel Prize winning physicist who works in econ ed, and we don't have that in econ, or sorry, it works in physics ed. Sorry, we don't have that in econ ed. I never really sort of realized that like other disciplines, they really do come from all sorts of universities. I think the Atlantic article does a really good job of talking about like listing out some like where the Nobel Prize winners are working currently.
Yep.
And I think there was actually this might have happened a couple years ago where there was a woman who won the Nobel Prize, but like had not gotten tenure at her previous university like the year before. Like she had like been denied tenure, left somewhere else, and then won the Nobel Prize, I think in chemistry. Um,
Wow.
but like that does not happen in economics. Like our Nobel Prize winners they're tenured at the top universities.
They've
It's
been
very
around a long
strange,
time.
and
Yeah.
they've been
And they've
around a
been
long
around
time.
a long time. Um, I think it's a fascinating question, and there's just so many ways to look at it. I think there are people, I think there's much too much of a focus by many on status in the profession, and it gets a bit obnoxious. So you go to the AEA meetings a lot. I've stopped
Yeah,
going because I've thought the
yeah.
people that I there are so obnoxious. I can't deal with some of them. I cannot deal with I don't know, status grabber sounds like the
Mhm.
wrong phrasing. I don't know that that's a real phrase, but people who are just so, they would look at what are listed by the US News top 50 schools, and they have to try to land at one of those or their life will be incomplete. And it's sad and it's pathetic and it's not a fun environment for me to be in. On
Mhm.
top of the fact that it's so massive that I didn't necessarily, like Jet Set had what,
About
140
100.
maybe? 100.
No, about 100.
About 100 people, plenty of good sessions. Everybody went to them. There's like 3,000 at or now there's 3,000. There used to be 12,000 or something at the
Yeah.
AEA. So I've found this problem, and that's not quite as related, but when they talk about some of the factors here, and you mentioned John List, and I've known John List. He's reviewed my papers before, which is somewhat of an honor because I think he's going to win a Nobel Prize. He,
Yeah.
he's very much the exception to the rule on these things. I think.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong. I mean, there's a few people who move around, but how many people land at Chicago from other places?
Thankfully, I have the answer for you.
Yeah.
Thanks to Todd Jones, and his co-author. I'm going to look it up real quick. Hopefully, I get it. Ariel Sloan. So I learned about this paper years ago. Todd has been working on this for a very long time. The version I pulled up when I first saw it was November 2020, but it has just officially been published in the Journal of Economic Education, um, which I hadn't realized it pops up as 2024. Todd and his co-author have a paper on the academic origins of economics faculty. So what they did was they went and looked at the top universities, who's working at those universities. So in econ, our top universities are the universities you're probably thinking about. It's Harvard, Yale, MIT, Chicago. I mean, I can't name all of them, but Berkeley, Stanford.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's ones that you probably think of. And he has a beautiful graph that we'll include in the show notes. Matt, I will share my screen so that you can sort of respond in real time with me.
No.
But he has this cool, it's called a Sankey graph, but basically like where they started their bachelor's programs, where they went to their PhD programs, and then where they finished. And basically what they found was students like Harvard gets most of their faculty got their PhD at Harvard. Programs like the faculty at MIT got their PhDs at MIT. If they don't, they got it from Yale, Berkeley, Stanford, right? The top students go to the top universities. And then one of the big problems I think in economics is that, and I'll say this as a problem mostly in the sense of this idea of concentration is there's not enough spots at universities for how many PhD graduates go there. So, right, some of the top Harvard graduates go to Harvard, but then the next batch of Harvard graduates go to Yale, and then the bottom batch go to Berkeley, and they sort of trickle down. And so, as a result, we have basically, even inside of our profession at lots of universities, lots of people who are really just taught in one way, or it's kind of one school of economics. So it's
Yeah.
I never realized it. Like I never connected the dots on that.
No, that is fascinating. And in terms of what's wrong with the profession, I think, and I'm speaking more on the fly. I prepped a little. We generally, those who've listened a long time, Jay Adrian and I, we don't prep. We come up with the topic, and our lives are busy, and we come on and we
And
talk.
sometimes we remember the topic when we log on.
Sometimes we remember the topic, sometimes not. But it's so you're getting somewhat first reactions, talking through, thinking through things. In many ways, I think there's way too much emphasis on how successful somebody would have been then in high school and undergraduate.
Yeah.
Because if you're not getting into, so will you not be viewed as a top economist at a top 10 school? You will not get into one of the quote unquote top 10 schools. And I'd like to say quote unquote, because there's, some judgment on those.
Mm-hmm.
If you didn't go to one of the top 10 schools, more or less. But you won't have done that unless you really had your act together in high school or in college. And that likely happened because you had parents who had PhDs or sent you to boarding school or things like that. And certainly if you had parents with PhDs or sent you to boarding school, you probably, on average, you got some good training. You probably had good habits instilled into you, and those are good things. But I'm dean of a business school now, and I will tell you that the mix of people who do stunningly well in their careers is way more diverse than the mix of people who would get the top grad school placements.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems like that's a problem. That we are leaving. There are a lot of super talented people who aren't likely no attention is being paid to their work, or they don't have the chance to succeed. That's kind of what I'm talking out loud here, but that seems to be what those graphs are showing.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's always really surprising, there are some maybe we should back up, right? And there are caveats in here. There's some amazing people at those universities that are doing amazing things, and they are incredibly generous, right? John List, you've mentioned, and those of you on Twitter, please go follow John List, because he's one of the nicest guys that's out there in the profession. And I've heard really great things. Yeah, he's great. I've gotten to interact with him and stuff, and he's done talks for like Abdullah and stuff.
And there are great people who have gone to Harvard and they are at Harvard or MIT, right? Like there's fantastic people at these places as well.
And maybe this is me being a bad economist, right? Maybe you chalk it up to that. So if we have econ PhD people listening, feel free to call me a bad economist. When I look at the list of names on those top universities, I don't know the names of all those people. They don't necessarily stand out. There are some amazing giants of our field that are absolutely there. But there's a lot of people on those lists that I'm like, I've never seen that name before. Maybe it's not my field. Maybe it's something else. But you know what? Then I think about there's some amazing people at other universities. So take Michigan, for example. It is a top program. Absolutely. Really great. There's people at that university that are active in the field and are trying to expand economics beyond what's happening at sort of the top 5 schools. But I think one of the issues is that because the top schools are so big and so powerful, not only is it sort of a PhD student placement, teaching, all that sort of stuff, but you see these same sort of problems in journal publishing. A lot of our editors, the top journals are housed at these top universities. And it's incredibly hard to publish in those journals unless you know somebody at those universities, or unless you co-author with people at those universities. It sort of creates this cycle, right? And I think that's the most frustrating part, is that the connections and the network in economics. And again, I don't know any other field. So Matt, maybe this is your experience out of getting to see more on a dean level of different departments. The network part is so big, and I think it leaves out a lot of people. I mean, there are great papers that don't get published that likely, I think there was a paper that came out. There's always these papers that come out, like if the author is from a top university, they have a better chance of being published.
Sure.
regardless of the quality of the paper. And that's so disappointing to me because I think, especially as economists, one of the things I don't like whenever we have core concepts of our field that we don't follow as part of a field. So, for example, we love the idea of comparative advantage, and yet I don't think we treat lecturers and teaching faculty as well as we should, despite the idea that people specialize in things and it's good for everybody.
Yep.
But I think about this in the same way in terms of competition, right? Like having competition and people moving around should make the profession better. But I feel like we've sort of not a monopoly, right? But we're getting monopolistic, that there is power concentrated in some parts, and we know that power concentrated in a handful of firms does not make society better off. And it feels like that's what we're doing.
So I was trying to think through, like, why do we have this? And first, I mean, they're talking about break up big econ. I'll say nothing has convinced me that there should be any government intervention on this. Nothing has made me think that will make things better whatsoever. One of the issues, so when I was thinking through like how well, I mean, I have the privilege of interacting. It's not as many academics, but people who have graduated and gone on to do amazing things. And some of them indeed would have been in the top 5% of their class at Susquehanna. Many of them, though, not. And they got out and then they were late bloomers, quote unquote. And they figured things out and they found their comparative advantage and they did incredibly well. The one issue, I'm curious of how much the tenure system plays into this. So if there's
tenure in other fields, right? Like,
so that doesn't explain econ versus other fields. Yeah, that's a fair point.
Like, why is it so constant? Is it just, I don't know. I guess maybe the answer is maybe it's in this tenure space, right? So we obviously have tenure like other ones. It doesn't take as long to get our stuff published or recognized, right? Like if you're working on chemistry, you're working in lab teams.
Yeah.
The research process takes longer. I don't know. We could pump out stuff fairly quickly.
We can, although I know that if you're in some of the hard sciences, you could work on a major experiment, which takes a whole lot of effort and time, but then you could get a number of papers from it. And they often have a lot of co-authors, so you have a chance to get a number of things on them. The kind of the elitism at the top part, I mean, I rejoined the AEA to go to CTRI, but I let my AEA lapse when they, I thought the 2023 American Economics Association, the ASSA meetings, they had people wear masks in 2023. And like, I wasn't going to those anyways, but I saw those and I was like, come on, people, how out of touch are you with society?
Is that AEA? No, that was SEA. Because that was 2023 was San Antonio.
AEA. Yeah, I've got it. I actually brought it up. I mean, I remember hearing about it. New Orleans, 2023, January 6th to 8th. So this is almost 3 years after COVID. And high quality masks are required in all indoor conference spaces in New Orleans. Right on the COVID-19 requirements. And then you're like,
I guess this year. Yeah, this year. Sorry, I'm off on the dates. You're right.
But I mean, this is 2.5. I mean, this is forever after things had happened. And like, kind of, who are the people who are running the AEA? They're not the people who I want anything to do with. And so I signed up because of CTRI again, but I don't consider that's not going on my resume that I'm part of the AEA anymore. I just think these people are so out of touch with reality that I think they're a bunch of clowns.
Speaking of who runs the AEA, and this is something that pops up on Twitter every single year. To be fair, it's not an AEA problem. It happens at all the other big associations as well. There is not actual competition for who we elect as our president. My understanding of the process is basically that the board of directors sort of nominates somebody and then they agree they don't run other people. So I don't know I guess no, because you're not a member, so you don't get the ballot.
I did get the ballot now, but I didn't even open it up and look.
Yep,
I mean, I just got it because it came this week.
There's one name on the ballot every year. That's it. To be fair, you can write in somebody else. But there's always ever one name on the ballot for president and for president-elect, and then I think some of the other ones might have some competition on it. But I pulled up the executive members: Princeton, Harvard, Stanford, Columbia, Swarthmore, Michigan, Boston, Brandeis, Michigan, Berkeley, Stanford, Dartmouth, Stanford, Berkeley, Dartmouth, MIT, Berkeley, Princeton, Columbia.
Yeah. Yeah,
that's not how the other ones do it.
It's an
History doesn't do
association
that.
I don't think has like it's a joke. They're a joke.
So let me say it this way. I think we're doing a lot of bashing on the people at the top. These are people involved, right? Like the person running the AA is doing a ton of work. So I don't want to bash
they
them
are
and say,
doing a ton of work,
right? I don't want to bash her and say, oh, she only got that because she's at Princeton. Like she's very qualified. She's qualified for the position. Absolutely. She's clearly doing a ton of work. But are there people at other universities that would be just as qualified and would also be willing to do just as much work and would expand the profession beyond what they're doing and recognize the needs of the profession broader? And my answer is yes, absolutely. My frustration is those are the people who don't have the opportunity to do that, right? If you have an amazing let's say Susquehanna hires a superstar PhD graduate who is just publishing in top 5 journals all the time, you'd have a hard time keeping them.
We wouldn't keep them, but yes.
Let's say they have a family attachment to Selinsgrove, right? Like they are from Selinsgrove, families in Selinsgrove. I don't know what it is, right? You somehow land the most amazing alumni donation to match salaries. They're not going to get the attention. They're not going to get on these boards. They're not going to become an editor, probably. They'll become an editor not at a top journal. They'll become an editor somewhere else. And that's frustrating.
In thinking through this, like thinking of top 20 schools, I don't think you mentioned Michigan. I don't think you mentioned Minnesota. I mean, those I think are in like top 20. Penn State's a pretty highly regarded school. There's nothing from Penn State. Virginia Tech is a fantastic PhD granting institution. I didn't hear Virginia Tech on that list. Yeah. And it's like the list is, when the people at the top, quote unquote, 50 institutions from 11 to 50 basically aren't represented essentially at all, you're going to have a tough time thinking that it was an inclusive process when you're choosing your members. And I think it's fine. We have an association. Everybody gets to vote. But then, it's called the American Economic Association, and I'm just not trusting that it's very representative of America. And that's part of why I joined in order to go to CTRI again. Mm-hmm. But I'm not, I don't think it's very representative of economics in the country. I do not think, CTRI is nice, but I don't think there is a value for pushing economic education to the masses. Like, I know they don't value it as much as you and I value it, but of course, we're outliers. We're probably in the top, 0.01% of how much we'd value pushing economics education, right? That's who we are. So I don't know if we intended to bash the AEA, but
no. And maybe I was pulling up Harvard's faculty page because I was curious. Like, I'm really curious how many people they have. But the way that they have their faculty page arranged, it's a little hard to see. Oh, actually, I guess I found it. Maybe the answer is as simple as the universities we're naming off have very large endowments, lots of funding. They can very easily afford to recruit just the best talent there. And, maybe it goes back to this idea of you look at something like chemistry, some of the money needs to be allocated towards a lab. And then there's leftover money that can go towards a person. And maybe on our side, it's just purely, we don't need lab space. Like we don't need that. So you can put more money towards the faculty versus other fields. At the end of the day, a lab is a lab. And this maybe I shouldn't have said it that way. I fully don't know. I'm sure that there are some chemistry labs that are better than others, but I imagine the cost of those labs are similar. And then picking up grant funding allows you to get even more money to bring in. It almost feels like a sort of a vicious cycle thing. So I talked about this with somebody from the College of Science today. One of my frustrations with the way that we do Giving Day. Do y'all have a Giving Day?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes, we do.
So my frustration with Giving Day is they've gamified it. That's not my frustration. Love the gamification. But they have little challenges throughout the week, throughout the day. And one of the challenges is whichever college raises the most money will get like $100,000 additional donation from the university. And that drives me absolutely insane because the schools that have the most money already are the ones that have alumni that give the most money already. And so all they do, they still win. It's for us, it's the College of Business. They win, and then they get more money that they can then go out to spend to like further recruit stuff. And like it's just so frustrating. And I think this is the same sort of problem here is they have amazing faculty. These people are
Yep.
very gifted, right? Like they're winning Nobel Prizes for reasons. They're gifted people, but then they get more money. They get more money from grants. They get more, and then they can hire
Yeah.
more gifted faculty members.
Yeah.
That's my frustration, right? Like it's frustrating.
So it's
How do we fix it, right? Like,
yeah, I think that's kind of a key question. I don't think any government coming in necessarily does
No.
anything. In many ways, I think it's the perception of individuals. Like, is the AEA still held in high esteem by a lot of people? I think by the
Yes.
press it still is.
Yes.
And
No,
you're
and I
saying yes.
think
You said
faculty-
yes immediately. So
Yes. No, it's right.
Okay.
So, I mean, we see it from a grad school standpoint is not necessarily just ours, but like across a lot of them, grad students, if you're funding grad students to go to conferences, a lot of times they'll only be funded to go to the AEA. Right. And so from a grad program's perspective, if you're short on funding and you can only send them one place, why not send them to the one that has the best people at it? To be fair, I don't think it's the top one, right? I think the MBER summer institutes are a much bigger sort of that's where the really top people are going. I think I don't think they're largely going to they're not going to present a 15-minute presentation on their future AER papers. So I think there's definitely more prestigious events or
Yep.
conferences, but I think it still carries a huge amount of weight. Just even being able to say that you presented and you were on the program at the AEA.
Yeah.
At a lot of smaller schools, that adds a lot of value that just other conferences don't.
Yeah, I would think. So what fixes the issue in general? I mean, part of it's going to be perception. Part of it, is there a change in weighting on communicating economics to the public versus that? I don't know that that's going to happen as much. Is it just that, hey, these places have more resources, so they're going to identify the top talent? And when Chicago sees there's somebody like a John List, who is a great guy on top of being a top scholar, they're going to say, hey, we're going to bring you in and we're going to make you an offer you can't refuse. You're going to want to live in Chicago. And
Yep. And we're going to pay you a ton of money, and you're going to get research assistants, and you're
Yep.
going to get a secretary, and you you only teach one class. And
so I don't know. That's an interesting question. I don't know what to do about it. I don't know how much of a major is it stifling ideas. I think that's kind of the key question. If we think the concentration at the top is stifling good research, then it's a major problem. I still don't know what you do about it.
So, this kind of takes me to this is not in the same space, but I wonder if there's some sort of solution that's similar. Like I think Eleanor Ostrom went to Indiana.
Yes.
Let me double check that.
Yeah, she was Indiana, 100%. Yep.
Right. So she went to UCLA, right? She worked at Indiana, but there's other issues that she had, right? Unlike why she was at Indiana versus other places. Right. But her big contribution in this space is hers is in Tragedy of the Commons, is this idea that you don't need government to fix things. You can, as a society, solve the tragedy of the commons when you have a collective agreement to work together on it. That's her. For those of you who don't know, that's sort of her. And correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that's her big sort of collected, or her.
Yeah,
her big
I think that's fair
reasoning, right?
Yeah, she figured out other non-governmental ways
Yeah.
to fix what had been thought of as market failures.
And
that
largely
had
the answer is
previously
community,
instituted.
right?
Yeah,
It's community is kind of the big part. Cooperatives, trust, trades, things like that. I wonder if there's some sort of like, I don't know what the term would be, Austromanian answers. Like I can't figure out how to change her name in a way to fix it. But maybe there's some sort of
We could all be.
answer.
I think we should all be Ostromites.
Ostromites.
That's. I don't know.
Is there some sort of Ostromian answer?
I like it. That's you got it. You nailed it. Ostromian.
Ostromian answer that I don't know that the answer is yes. The closest I can get is I think you see this in fields. I don't know that we can solve that problem for the whole association. But I do think, and right, you said you went to C-Tree, which I think is a good example of sort of the econ ed community.
Yep.
It's over my 10 years of doing econ ed stuff, I definitely think it's getting better. That there is, I think it's still too clicky. I don't like the clicky aspect of it, that there's sort of top econ educators and then other ones. But I think there's getting a better push of like, I'll take myself for example. I did not feel included in the econ ed community for a very long time when I first started. And a lot of that was I was a teaching faculty. I wasn't on the tenure track, so I wasn't doing it seriously. But I think over the past 5 years, that has radically changed, where I do feel much more respected in the econ ed community, and still a teaching faculty. I'm at a lower ranked university econ wise, but I think we're starting to develop, at least in econ ed, a reputation that it doesn't have to be people at the top programs. It doesn't have to be tenure faculty. It can be lecturers, instructors, adjuncts. Like I think we're getting better. I just cannot imagine in my lifetime that trickles up, and that each field does it, and then somehow we figure it out as a field. I'm going to be super pessimistic on that.
I really don't know. I don't know that I have the answer to either the big problems, like or the little, or how is it solved. I think it would take time. I think, as you know, a lot of what can be done that's good, I think in the last 10 or 15 years, the ability to do things like what you do, like what a lot of other really great economists do in terms of outreach with newsletters that are subscribed to by thousands, or some of them have tens of thousands. Part of why I did the YouTube channel is to try to reach a whole bunch of non-economists, right? And that's something kind of new. Maybe 10 years ago I could have done it, but
no, I think Noah Smith's a great example, right? I mean, he has
a great example.
He has like 100,000 followers.
Insane.
To be fair,
and I see the stuff
Michigan,
he writes. When he writes something, I'm like, man, the guy's brilliant. Just in terms of the sheer quality contributions that he puts out, the guy is just brilliant.
He does have a PhD from Michigan, I'm pretty sure. But when he was a professor, he was at Stony Brook. Or you take somebody like Brian Albrecht, right, who's writing Economics Forces, has a PhD from Minnesota, so top program, right? But he's not there. I think he's working at a think tank.
School.
He's at a liberal arts school, but I think he's taken off to do a think tank right now. But he is educating the masses, bringing economics into focus. Maybe you know what? Maybe that's the answer. Maybe it really is sort of this grassroots where we have the time to write these things because we aren't tied down to needing to get tenure and publish only papers in top journals. And so maybe this is where more the focus is. I don't know that respect is going to flow down though. I hope so. I hope it does one day.
Could be. For those listening, be kind of curious. I think we ranted more than we usually rant today. So hopefully, normally we're just, I think we're generally pretty optimistic and cheery, but I felt like I was ranting more. I'm in a good mood tonight. I don't know why. Might be the caramel mule, but
it's that caramel mule, right? You got something other than a beer.
Would love any comments you had on what your thoughts were on these break up big econ type articles that have come out, and what do you think? Please go ahead and leave a comment on our Substack or on any of the podcast providers, or send us an email right on Twitter. We'd love to hear any exciting pop culture for the day to talk about. I certainly have nothing on breaking up big econ. I promise. I don't know what I'm going to come up with, but I know it won't be that.
Yeah, you know what? I'm not going to give you I'm not going to give you pop culture. I'm going to give you a pop econ culture, maybe.
Okay.
One of my favorite economists. He knows that he's one of my favorite economists. I just love all the work he does. Scott Cunningham. Just
okay. Yep.
I love his stuff. So he writes the Mixtape, which again I think he's another good example of he's a Baylor, got a PhD from Georgia, but he is changing a lot of stuff for a lot of people.
Absolutely. He does great work.
I love Scott. He's a really good guy, and he's talked to my class a bunch of times. He has a cool podcast also.
Very cool.
So I'm gonna shout out his podcast. It's called the Mixtape with Scott. He does a lot of different stuff. Like he has a newsletter and a podcast. He does like teaching workshops around the country. But I wanted to bring this up because I want to say maybe last week. So by the time you're hearing this, maybe it was 2 weeks ago. One of the things Scott does is he interviews economists from all different. So he's interviewed Nobel laureates to all sorts of people. The way he sort of phrases it is he is trying to tell an oral history of the profession. So he'll ask them, how'd you get interested in economics? What's a favorite memory you have? Like, he'll talk about research and stuff. The one I listened to last week, he just interviewed Greg Mankiw, which when I saw the preview of that, I was so excited. So he does it on YouTube as well, puts it out on Spotify. But he interviewed Greg Mankiw, and I was just so fascinated because those of us in the education community either love or hate Greg Mankiw's book. But I think what's really cool about it is Greg Mankiw is an incredibly I don't know. Have you ever actually gotten to meet him?
Yeah,
before?
I met him. I met him at a Cengage, and I used his textbook for a few years. I ended up switching over to Dirk's and Lee's,
but he's a super nice guy. Like he
was so kind. He wrote a blurb for Broadway Econ for me.
Yeah.
Because we chatted about Broadway and economics at the thing, and then I sent him a copy of the book, and he was kind enough to write a blurb just super nice guy. I did not know that. I'm excited now for this podcast. So.
Yeah. So he just interviewed him, and so it talks about how kind of him bouncing around, going different places, and basically like he got tenure like within a year or two of being at Harvard, and it was I'll spoil the story just a little bit. Like the rest of the podcast is great. But basically, he had gone to MIT, went back to Harvard. MIT was trying to recruit him within a year or two, and Harvard basically said, "No, we don't want to lose you. How about we give you tenure instead?" And I think he said he'd only worked for like 2 years there, and so like he got tenure almost immediately. And so because he got tenure, he was able to. I think he said he wrote the book. I think he said he wrote his principal's book when he was like 32, maybe. And I don't know. It was like shockingly young. Which. He has, those of you listening who are not economists, it's the most popular textbook that exists. And he's been doing this for like 30 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
no, that's really cool.
Nerdy pop econ. I'll go pop econ is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that was a good one. And I have nothing that's nearly as related, but I'll just, I'm looking through what I'm about to publish on YouTube here pretty soon. I'm gonna do one. I'm gonna do an economics in the movies kind of series. So each week it's looking at different movies. Sometimes it'll be the same movie for a few weeks. But so this is nothing to do whatsoever with our topic tonight. But it is it is econ. I'm gonna do a movie. Gosh, you were born, but you might have been in like middle school.
Okay, that made me feel real old there for a second.
No, I mean I'm not that much older than you, but do you know if I say the movie Contact, does that mean anything to you?
Mm-mm.
Jodie Foster was in it, and Matthew McConaughey. But it's a cool analogy. The movie, I think this episode should be up, and I'm like, I did the video, and I'm like, man, like it's gonna get like 10 views. Who in the world remembers this movie anymore? But I kind of enjoyed it, and I think it's a neat analogy. You can watch for more, but they're making contact with outer space, and there's like a vessel to send the Jodie Foster through, and they get plans for it. But then they're scared about no restraining harness or anything. Like, what would there be if there's just unfettered, you're just in the vessel and going through? And so they put a restraining harness in, but it screws everything up and makes things worse. She takes it off. And I think it's actually somewhat of an analogy for some of the restrictions we see on markets in terms of, you think of unrestricted markets. Things could just go so horribly wrong. We have to restrict. And then some of the problems that end up happening because of that. And it's a neat little analogy. And if you want to go see it, it should be live more or less the day this comes out, or maybe the day after. And you could be one of the select few that will ever watch this video, because who in the world remembers Contact from, I think, 1998? But I kind of made the decision, and this will be a shout out to Abdullah, who we've had on. Like, I think talking to him was like, I'm going to do something I think is cool. And if only 10 people or 20 people or whatever, 50 people watch it, yeah, I'm okay with it. I'm gonna like what I put out there and be excited about it. So I think it's kind of a cool analogy for free markets, and I'm promoting it in part because I think I'm gonna need you to help me get some views on this. Thank you all.
You're gonna make me have to watch Contact. I just watched the first Beetlejuice so that I can go to the movies hopefully this weekend and watch the remake of Beetlejuice.
The musical is killer if you get the chance.
Okay, good, because I forgot how bad the first movie was.
The musical has got some great songs in it. It's fantastic.
Yeah. Finished the movie and I was like, what is this about? What did I just watch?
I was not going to subject myself to rewatching that. But if you go to see the new one, let me know if it's good.
Yeah. Hey, good news. People who are listening, sorry, it's too late, but Matt will appreciate this. Tomorrow night, Matt, going to see Shrek the Musical.
That's another great show.
I've heard it's really good.
Yeah. And you can do the Broadway econ song that I have up for the pop culture hit next time. But
okay, good.
Shrek's fun. There's some great songs in there. Shrek's just a fun story. So.
Yeah. I'm
well,
excited.
Thank you all for listening. Our next episode, normally our episodes come out on Thursdays, and our next episode would be released the Thursday just a couple days before the Nobel Prize announcement. So I think Jadrian and I have decided we're going to wait until that Monday or Tuesday. We're going to do a Nobel Prize episode that comes out then. So we might be a little bit more delayed just by a couple days, but then you will get our live reaction to the 2024 Nobel Prize winner or winners in economics. And we will see if any of them are not from the Power Eight, right?
No, it's going to be like Raj Chetty.
Yeah. We should place our bets ahead of time on this. So be good. But any closing words of wisdom, Jadrian?
Nah, I've got nothing for you. I appreciate everybody who's made it this far into the podcast.
Yeah, thank you. Big shout out to those who listened, especially got a great shout out from Jose Fernandez making fun of me for saying how socialist healthcare might be less terrible than our current system. But that meant he listened way in. So big shout out to everybody who's still listening, and we really do appreciate all of you. And until next time, cheers.
Cheers, Matt.